A simple act of kindness cost her the job she loved, but the very next day, it changed her life forever. Maria had always been the kind of person who believed that small acts of kindness could make the world a better place. She lived in a quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other, and most people recognized her as the smiling waitress at the local diner. Every morning, she would wake up early, tie her dark hair into a neat ponytail, put on her simple uniform, and walk down the street to the little place where she worked. The diner wasn't fancy. The paint on the outside was fading, and the neon sign sometimes flickered, but for Maria, it was more than just a job. It was almost like a second home. She had started working there 5 years ago when she was only 20. At first, it was just supposed to be temporary, a way to help her family pay bills and maybe save for college. But life didn't go as planned. Her mother fell sick. Her younger brother still needed school fees. And Maria decided she couldn't leave them without support. So, the diner became her steady ground. Over time, she had memorized the menu, knew exactly how each regular liked their coffee, and could carry 3 plates at once without spilling a drop. Despite the long hours, Maria rarely complained. Her friends sometimes asked her why she stayed in such a tiring job for so little pay. And she always smiled and said, "Because people here need a smile, and I can give them one." That was the kind of person she was. Even on the hardest days, when her feet hurt from walking back and forth across the floor, she would keep her cheerful tone and say good morning, or how are you today, as if nothing in the world could bring her down. Her customers loved her for it. There was Mr. Thompson, an old man who came every Thursday for chicken soup because he said it reminded him of his late wife's cooking. Maria always made sure to bring him an extra slice of bread without charging him. Then there was a group of high school kids who stopped by after football practice. They didn't always have enough money, but Maria would wink and say, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you're full." She didn't do these things because she wanted attention or bigger tips. She did them because she truly cared. At home, things were harder. Her paycheck wasn't much, and once she paid rent and bought groceries, there was barely anything left. She often skipped buying new clothes for herself, and instead, she would fix her old shoes with glue when they started to tear. But no one at the diner ever guessed she was struggling, because she never showed it. She carried herself with quiet dignity, always putting others before her own troubles. Maria's coworkers sometimes teased her, saying she was too nice and that people might take advantage of her. She would just laugh it off. Deep down, she knew that kindness was her strength, not her weakness. She had learned that from her mother, who used to say, "If you can't give money, give love. If you can't give love, at least give kindness." Those words stayed with Maria, especially after her mother's illness forced her to grow up quickly. The diner itself had its ups and downs. Business was not always good. Some days it was full of customers, while other times Maria would spend hours cleaning tables that no one sat at. The manager, Mr. Reed, was strict and often cared more about rules than about people. He would remind the staff constantly, "Don't give away food. Don't waste time chatting. Focus on the money." Maria listened, but never fully followed that way of thinking. For her, the diner was not just about money, it was about people and stories. Every person who walked in carried something heavy or hopeful, and she wanted to make their day just a little lighter. One rainy evening, Maria stayed longer than usual because the storm outside was keeping customers stuck at their tables. She didn't mind. She liked rainy nights at the diner, the sound of water hitting the windows, the smell of hot coffee, and the soft hum of the jukebox in the corner. As she walked between tables, refilling cups and checking on people, she thought about her life. She didn't have much, but she had purpose. And for her, that meant everything. Maria's routine became almost like a rhythm of life. She knew when certain regulars would arrive, what jokes would make them laugh, and when to leave someone alone if they looked tired. She paid attention to details, the little things others often missed. If a customer came in with red eyes, she might quietly place a napkin on the table before they even asked. If a young mother came in with kids, Maria would bring extra spoons or straws without being told. These small gestures didn't take much effort, but they left lasting impressions. Her kindness even stretched beyond the diner. Sometimes she would slip a few coins from her tips into the donation jar at the grocery store. Other times she would walk her elderly neighbor's dog when the woman couldn't manage it. She never expected anything in return, and most people didn't even know how much she gave of herself. To the world, she was just a waitress. But to the people around her, she was a light they didn't want to lose. Still, there were nights when Maria lay awake wondering what her future would be. She was 25 now, and while her friends were moving on to new jobs or starting families, she was still wearing the same apron and serving the same plates. She dreamed of something bigger, maybe owning her own little cafe one day, where kindness, not profit, would be the rule. But those dreams seemed far away, hidden behind bills and responsibilities. Despite all this, Maria never let her personal worries show when she was at work. She believed that when she stepped into the diner, she had a duty to bring warmth to the people who came in, and she did it with all her heart. Customers didn't see a young woman struggling to survive. They saw someone who genuinely cared about them. That was what made her different. On weekends, when the diner was busiest, Maria moved quickly, carrying trays and balancing orders with skill. But even then, she never rushed her conversations with customers. She listened to their stories, laughed at their jokes, sometimes even offered quiet encouragement when someone was feeling down. She became more than a waitress. She became part of people's lives. For some, she was the only friendly face they saw all week. What Maria didn't know was that her way of living her quiet strength. Her constant giving was about to be tested in ways she could not imagine. Life had a way of turning suddenly, without warning, and she was about to step into a chapter that would change her forever. But at that moment, in those days before everything shifted, Maria was simply herself, a young woman with a tired smile, a caring heart, and a belief that even the smallest kindness could matter more than anyone realized. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening when the door of the diner swung open, and a man walked in who didn't seem to belong. He wore faded jeans that looked a little too big for him, a wrinkled shirt, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. His hair was messy, and he carried himself with a kind of nervous energy, as if he wasn't sure whether he should even be there. Most people who came into the diner either looked relaxed or rushed. But this man seemed different. Maria noticed him right away. She always noticed people who looked out of place. It was part of her nature. Her eyes were trained to catch small details others ignored. He didn't walk straight to a booth or the counter. Instead, he paused near the door for a moment, glanced around at the other customers, and then slowly moved toward a corner table. He sat down with the kind of hesitation that told Maria he wasn't used to eating out very often. She picked up a menu and walked over with her usual smile. "Good evening. Would you like to see the menu?" she asked warmly. The man looked up at her, almost startled, as if he wasn't expecting such kindness. He gave a small nod, and Maria placed the menu in front of him as she walked away to check on another table. She kept glancing at him. She saw the way his eyes moved nervously across the page, his brow furrowing as though the prices were higher than he had expected. He picked up the menu, set it down, and then picked it up again. Maria could tell he was stalling. When she returned a few minutes later, he still hadn't made a decision. "Take your time," she said gently, "but if you'd like, I can recommend something." The man cleared his throat and spoke softly, almost like he didn't want others to hear. "What's the cheapest meal here?" His voice carried a mix of embarrassment and honesty. Maria's heart softened. She could see the pride in his eyes, the kind of pride that doesn't want pity, but can't hide the struggle either. She leaned closer and said quietly, "The soup is filling and not expensive. A lot of people like it." He nodded quickly, relieved to have an answer, and ordered just that one bowl of soup and a glass of water. When Maria placed the order with the cook, she couldn't stop thinking about the man. She knew hunger when she saw it. His hands were rough, his face tired, and his clothes suggested he hadn't had an easy time. Something inside her wanted to do more. She had seen many customers who struggled with money before, but there was something about his quiet dignity that touched her heart. When the soup was ready, she carried it over with her brightest smile. "Here you go," she said, placing the steaming bowl in front of him. She noticed the way he inhaled deeply, as if the smell alone gave him comfort. He picked up the spoon and began eating slowly, savoring every bite. As she refilled a nearby table's coffee, Maria got an idea. The diner had baked fresh pies that afternoon, and she knew there were a few slices left that would probably be thrown out by closing time. She decided then and there that this man would not leave without having something sweet. A little while later, after making sure her manager wasn't paying attention, Maria quietly placed a slice of warm apple pie in front of him. His eyes widened in surprise. "I didn't order this," he said quickly, almost worried. Maria gave a small wink and whispered, "It's on the house. Everyone deserves dessert sometimes." For a moment, the man just stared at her. He seemed almost unsure whether to accept it. But then his expression softened, and a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He took a bite, and Maria saw something change in his eyes. It wasn't just about the pie, it was about being seen, about someone caring enough to notice when he needed kindness. Throughout his meal, Maria checked in on him without hovering. She treated him like she would treat any other customer, making sure he never felt like a charity case. That balance was something she had mastered giving, without making someone feel small. By the time he finished, he seemed more relaxed, sitting straighter in his chair and even glancing around the diner as though the weight on his shoulders had lifted just a little. When he paid for his soup at the counter, he left a small tip, even though it was clear he didn't have much. Maria didn't care about the money, but she could see the gratitude in his eyes as he thanked her. It wasn't the kind of quick thanks people usually gave, it was deeper, the kind that comes from the heart. What Maria didn't know, as she cleared his table after he left, was that the man was no ordinary customer. Beneath his worn-out clothes and humble manner, he was actually the new owner of the diner, visiting undercover to see how his staff treated people. He had inherited the place recently and wanted to understand the reality of how it ran before making any changes. He had expected to be treated like just another poor customer, perhaps even ignored or rushed through. But Maria's kindness had stunned him. He sat in his car outside the diner for a while, thinking about what had just happened. She hadn't known who he was, and yet she had treated him with genuine respect and compassion. She had given him her time, her warmth, and even part of her tip money when she offered that slice of pie without charging. To him, that meant more than anything else, inside the diner. Maria went back to her routine as though nothing unusual had happened. She didn't brag to anyone about what she had done, and she didn't even think of it as extraordinary. To her, helping people was as natural as breathing. But that small act, so simple, so ordinary in her mind, was about to set events into motion that she could never have predicted. The night ended quietly. Customers left one by one, the lights in the diner dimmed, and Maria stayed late to wipe down the tables and sweep the floor. She was tired, as always, but she carried with her a quiet sense of peace. She didn't know who the man was, and she didn't expect to ever see him again. For her, it was just another night where she had done what she believed in, treating a stranger with kindness. Yet outside, in the cool night air, the undercover boss drove away with a heart full of questions. He thought about the strict rules he had heard from the manager, the way food was measured and costs counted. And then he thought about Maria, about how she broke those rules, not for herself but for someone else. It made him wonder what kind of workplace this diner really was. By the time he reached home, his mind was made up. He would return. He needed to see more. He needed to understand why someone like Maria could shine so brightly in a place that seemed to care only about profit. He didn't know it yet. But her small act of kindness would change not only her life, but the future of the diner itself. For Maria, it was just another ordinary shift. For the stranger, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. And though she didn't realize it, her life was about to take a sharp turn, one that would test her kindness, shake her stability, and eventually reward her in ways she had never imagined. The next morning started like any other for Maria. She woke up early, tied her hair neatly, and slipped into her uniform. The sun was shining outside, but inside her small apartment, she felt the same quiet worry she always carried. Bills were waiting on the table. Her brother needed money for books. Her mother's medicine still cost more than she could easily afford. But Maria never let those worries stop her from putting on a smile. She told herself, as she always did, one day at a time. When she walked into the diner, the smell of fresh coffee greeted her. She set her bag down, tied her apron, and began preparing for the shift. The place looked the same as yesterday, tables neatly set, counter shining, and the hum of the kitchen beginning to rise as cooks prepared for the morning rush. Maria felt comfort in the routine. She didn't know that this would be the day her world turned upside down. Barely an hour into her shift, the manager, Mr. Reed, called out to her in his usual stern voice, "Maria, in my office." Now, his tone was sharp, the kind that made her stomach tighten. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the small office at the back of the diner inside. The blinds were half closed, letting in thin lines of light across the desk piled with papers. Mr. Reed sat with his arms folded, his face hard. Maria stood nervously, waiting for him to speak. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked coldly. Maria shook her head. "No, sir." "Did I do something wrong?" He leaned forward. "Last night a customer reported that you gave away food without permission. Is that true?" Maria felt her cheeks flush. She thought instantly of the man in the faded clothes, the one she had offered a slice of pie. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded honestly. "Yes, sir. I gave him a piece of pie. It was going to be thrown away at the end of the night. I didn't think it would hurt." Double quotes. Mr. Reed slammed his palm on the desk. "That's not your decision to make. Rules are rules. We don't give away food. Ever." His voice rose with each word, echoing off the small office walls. Maria tried to explain. "He looked hungry, and I just wanted to help. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about kindness." "Kindness doesn't pay the bills," Mr. Reed snapped. "Do you know how much money this diner loses every year because of employees who think they can make exceptions? You think you're helping? But what you're really doing is stealing." The word hit Maria like a slap. Stealing. She had never stolen anything in her life. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the manager didn't give her a chance. "You're fired," he said firmly. "Pack your things and leave immediately." For a moment, Maria just stood frozen, unable to believe what she had heard. Fired for a slice of pie that would have gone to waste? Her chest tightened, and her eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. "Please, Mr. Reed, I've worked here for 5 years. I've given everything to this place. I didn't mean any harm. Please." But his face remained cold. "I don't want to hear it. You're done here." The words sank deep. Maria felt her world crumble. The diner wasn't just her job, it was her stability, her lifeline. Without it, how would she pay rent? How would she take care of her mother and brother? She wanted to beg, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Mr. Reed's decision was final. With trembling hands, she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the desk. Her heart felt heavy as she walked out of the office. The other staff looked at her in confusion as she picked up her bag. Some whispered quietly, but no one dared ask what had happened. Maria kept her head down, not wanting them to see her tears. When she stepped outside, the sunlight that had seemed warm in the morning now felt harsh and cold. She sat on the steps for a moment, her hands shaking. She thought about the man from last night, about his tired eyes, and the way he had smiled when she gave him the pie. If she had the chance to do it all over again, she knew she would still have helped him. But knowing that didn't ease the pain of losing her job. As she walked home, her thoughts raced. Every step felt heavy, like she was carrying the weight of her whole life on her shoulders. She tried to think of what she would tell her family. How could she admit that she had lost her job over something so small? People might not understand. They might say she should have followed the rules, even if it meant turning away from someone in need. When she reached her small apartment, she sat at the kitchen table and buried her face in her hands. For the first time in a long while, she let the tears flow freely. She thought of all the nights she had worked late, all the times she had sacrificed her own comfort to make sure the diner ran smoothly. And now, it had all ended in an instant. Her brother walked in from school and noticed her sitting silently. "Maria, are you okay?" he asked gently. She wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile. "I'm fine," she whispered, not wanting to worry him. But inside, she felt broken. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She cooked dinner quietly, cleaned the apartment, and pretended everything was normal. But her mind kept going back to that office, to the anger in Mr. Reed's voice, and the finality of his words, "fired." The word echoed again and again, each time cutting deeper. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep refused to come. She thought about the man she had helped. She wondered if he even knew what had happened to her. Maybe he had gone on with his life, unaware that his presence had changed hers completely. She didn't regret helping him, but she wished the world had been kinder in return. By midnight, she was still awake, her mind spinning with fear and uncertainty. How would she find another job? The town was small, and opportunities were few. Would anyone hire her quickly enough to cover the bills? Would people believe Mr. Reed's version of the story that she had been stealing? The thought made her stomach churn. Maria had always been strong, but that night, the quiet darkness of her small room, she felt fragile. She had always given so much of herself to others, and now she was left with nothing in return. For the first time, she doubted her belief that kindness was always the right choice. She whispered softly to herself, "Did I really do the wrong thing?" But deep down, even as fear and sadness filled her, a small voice inside told her she hadn't. She had done what her heart told her to do, and maybe that was enough. She didn't know that the very man she had helped would soon reappear in her life, and that her darkest day was only the beginning of something far greater than she could ever imagine. For now, though, she lay quietly in the dark, unaware that the wheels of fate were already turning, and that the stranger in faded clothes was about to return, not as a poor man needing help, but as someone who held the power to change everything. The next afternoon, Maria was still sitting in her apartment, staring at the bills on the table. She had barely eaten since yesterday. Her thoughts were heavy, and she kept replaying the moment when Mr. Reed told her she was fired. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Every time she thought of the diner, her chest tightened. It had been more than just a place to work. It had been her second home, the place where she had built small connections with people every single day. Losing it so suddenly felt like losing a piece of herself. She tried to stay strong for her brother, but he could see the sadness in her eyes. Her mother, who was too weak to work, asked softly if everything was okay. Maria only nodded and said she was fine, not wanting to worry them more. Deep inside, she felt like she was failing them. The next day, Maria decided to go for a walk. She needed fresh air to clear her mind. As she walked past the diner, her heart ached. She saw other waitresses inside, moving between tables, carrying trays. She imagined herself in there, smiling, serving customers, and she almost burst into tears. She turned away quickly and walked faster, not wanting anyone to see her sadness. As she rounded the corner, she suddenly stopped. A black car was parked outside the diner, and stepping out of it was the same man she had helped 2 nights before, the man with the faded jeans and tired eyes. But this time, he looked completely different. He wore a clean suit, polished shoes, and carried himself with quiet authority. Maria froze in shock. Could it really be him? She watched from a distance as he entered the diner with confidence. Inside, the staff looked surprised. Mr. Reed hurried out of his office, shaking the man's hand eagerly. It was clear that this man was important. Maria's heart raced as realization slowly sank in. The stranger wasn't just another customer. He was someone with power, someone who had come back for a reason. A few moments later, as Maria stood frozen near the corner, the man stepped back outside. His eyes landed on her immediately, as if he had been searching for her. His serious expression softened when he saw her. He walked straight toward her. "Maria," he said kindly, his voice steady and warm. "I'm glad I found you." She blinked in confusion. You remember my name?" He nodded. "Of course. How could I forget the person who showed me such kindness when she didn't even know who I was?" Maria's throat tightened. "I don't understand. Who are you really?" The man smiled faintly. "My name is Daniel Harris. I'm the new owner of this diner. I've been visiting Undercover to see how my employees treat customers. And 2 nights ago, you showed me something no policy, no rule, and no training manual could ever touch: real compassion." Maria's heart pounded. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was stare at him in disbelief. Daniel continued, his tone more serious now. I heard what happened yesterday. Mr. Reed fired you for giving me that slice of pie. I want you to know that he was wrong. You didn't break this diner. You showed me what this place should stand for: kindness, humanity, and care. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. But he said I was stealing. I didn't mean any harm. I couldn't let you leave without something more. Daniel shook his head. You didn't steal anything. You gave more to this diner in that one small act than anyone else has in months. You reminded me why people come here, Ritz, not just the food. It's the feeling of being seen and valued. He paused, then added firmly, Maria, I want you back. Not only do I want you back, but I also want to give you a higher position. You deserve more than to be treated like you don't matter. Maria gasped, her hand covering her mouth. She had expected nothing, not even to see him again. And now, here he was, offering her not just her job, but something better. Are you serious? She whispered. Completely serious, Daniel said with a nod. From this day forward, you will be a supervisor here. Your kindness is exactly the example I want others to follow. And as for Mr. Reed, he won't be running things anymore. At that moment, as if on cue, Mr. Reed stepped outside, his face pale and tense. He had clearly overheard the conversation. Daniel turned to him sharply. Mr. Reed, your behavior toward Maria and your lack of understanding of true service make it clear you are not fit to manage this diner. Your position is terminated. Effective immediately. Maria stood in shock as the manager who had humiliated her just the day before was now the one being dismissed. Mr. Reed sputtered, trying to argue, but Daniel's decision was final. With anger and embarrassment, the man stormed away, leaving Maria and Daniel standing together in front of the diner. For a long moment, Maria couldn't speak. Everything had happened so fast. Yesterday, she had been in tears, believing her world had collapsed. Today, the very same act that had cost her everything was now lifting her higher than she had ever imagined. Daniel looked at her gently. You thought kindness was a weakness, didn't you? You thought it ruined your future. But Maria, it's the opposite. It's your greatest strength. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Maria's tears finally spilled over. But this time, they were tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. Just keep being yourself, Daniel replied. That's all I ask. Later that day, Maria walked back into the diner, this time not as the waitress who had been fired. She walked in as the new supervisor, with the support of the owner himself. The other staff looked at her with wide eyes, whispering in surprise. Customers who recognized her smiled warmly, happy to see her back. Maria took a deep breath, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not the kind of pride that comes from power or money, but the pride of knowing that her values had not been wasted. She had lost everything in one moment, but because she had stayed true to herself, she had gained back more than she ever expected. That evening, as she stood by the counter watching customers enjoy their meals, Maria realized something important. Life could change in an instant. Yesterday had been her lowest point, but today showed her that even when things fall apart, something better can come if you stay true to who you are. She thought again of her mother's words. If you can't give money, give love. If you can't give love, at least give kindness. Those words had guided her through her hardest choices, and now they had brought her to this moment. The diner felt different that night. The atmosphere was lighter, warmer, as if everyone could sense the change. Maria moved through the tables with a smile, no longer afraid of breaking rules that punish compassion. She was finally free to be herself, to lead with kindness, and to inspire others to do the same. As the lights dimmed at closing time, she looked out at the empty tables and felt hope rising in her chest. What had started as the worst day of her life had turned into the beginning of something new. And deep inside, Maria knew this was only the start of her journey. The weeks after Maria's return to the diner felt like a dream she still wasn't sure was real. Every morning when she tied her apron and walked through the familiar doors, she felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Just days earlier, she had thought her life was falling apart. Now, she was not only back in the diner, but trusted with more responsibility than ever before. The staff looked at her differently too. Some were surprised at her promotion, others were inspired. But everyone knew the truth: Maria had earned it through her heart, not through power or rules. She learned quickly what it meant to be a supervisor. She wasn't just taking orders and serving tables anymore. She had to guide the other waitresses, check that everything ran smoothly, and sometimes even handle customer complaints. It was more pressure than before, but Maria carried it with grace. She never forgot what it felt like to be in their shoes, running back and forth with tired feet and forced smiles. So when one of the younger waitresses looked overwhelmed, Maria would quietly step in, take a tray from her hands, and say, "Don't worry, I've got this one." That small gesture earned her respect in a way no title ever could. The customers noticed the change as well. They saw Maria moving through the diner with quiet authority, but she never lost her warmth. She still remembered their favorite orders, still stopped to listen to their stories, still smiled like nothing mattered more than their comfort. For the regulars, her promotion felt like justice. They had watched her kindness for years. Now they were glad it had finally been recognized. Daniel, the new owner, visited often in those early weeks. He watched quietly from a corner booth as Maria worked, making notes but also observing the atmosphere. Each time he saw her interact with customers, his decision to promote her felt more right. One afternoon, he called her over and said, "Maria, do you see what's happening here? The diner feels different because of you. People aren't just coming for the food anymore. They're coming for the feeling you create." Those words touched Maria deeply. For years, she had believed her small acts of kindness went unnoticed. Now she realized they had been shaping the diner's reputation all along. People remembered kindness more than they remembered a menu price. Outside of work, life also began to change. With her new position came a better paycheck. It wasn't enough to make her rich, but it was enough to ease the constant fear of falling behind. She could pay the rent on time without counting every coin. She bought her brother the school books he needed, and she even managed to surprise her mother with a warm shawl for the winter. The look on her mother's face when she opened the gift made Maria's heart swell. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. But the biggest change was inside her. Losing her job had shaken her confidence. She had spent hours wondering if kindness had been a mistake. Now, standing in her new role, she knew the truth. Kindness was not weakness. It was strength, and it was the very thing that had carried her through. That realization gave her a new kind of confidence. She no longer doubted her instincts. She trusted that doing the right thing, even when it cost her, was always worth it. News of her story began to spread beyond the diner. One regular customer who worked for the local newspaper had written a small article about the waitress who was fired for kindness. At first, Maria was embarrassed. She didn't want attention. She only wanted to do her job. But when she saw the way people reacted, how inspired they were, she began to understand that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a reminder to others that compassion could make a difference. People started coming from nearby towns, curious to meet the waitress who had been fired and then promoted for helping a stranger. Some customers would smile and say, "You're Maria, aren't you? The one from the story?" She would blush and nod, always humble, never seeking praise. She didn't think of herself as special. She thought of herself as someone who had simply done what was right. One evening, as she wiped down the counter after closing, Daniel approached her again. "Do you realize what you've started?" he asked. She looked at him, confused. He continued, "This diner used to be about money and rules. Now, it's about people. And it's because of you. You've set the example. You've shown everyone, including me, that kindness isn't just good for the soul. It's good for business, too." Maria smiled softly. "I never thought of it that way. I just wanted to help people. And that's exactly why it worked," Daniel replied. In the months that followed, Maria used her new role to quietly change the culture of the diner. She encouraged her coworkers to treat customers with more care, not just efficiency. She started a small tradition where leftover food at the end of the night was packed and given to those in need, instead of being thrown away. At first, some resisted, afraid of breaking rules, but when they saw Daniel's support and Maria's dedication, they joined in. Slowly, the diner became known not just for its meals, but for its heart. Maria's personal life blossomed too. With a little more stability, she finally allowed herself to dream again. She began saving, even if it was just a small amount each week. She still held on to the hope of one day owning her own cafe, a place built on the same values she carried. For now, though, she was content. She had learned that dreams didn't need to come all at once. They could grow slowly, with patience and faith. Her brother often teased her, saying, "You're famous now." Whenever customers recognized her, her mother, with tears in her eyes, told her, "I always knew your heart would lead you somewhere good." Those words gave Maria strength on the hardest days. When work was demanding and responsibilities weighed heavy, looking back, she sometimes thought about the night she gave the stranger that slice of pie. At the time, it felt like nothing more than a small act. She had no idea it would cost her job, no idea it would change her life. That memory reminded her of a truth she carried with her now: the smallest choices can have the biggest consequences. A simple moment of compassion had rewritten her future. The diner thrived under the new changes. Customers stayed longer, laughed louder, and returned more often. It wasn't just a place to eat, it became a place where people felt cared for. Maria saw families grow, couples celebrate anniversaries, and lonely people find comfort at the counter. Each story, each face, reminded her why she had chosen kindness in the first place. Years later, people would still talk about the waitress who was fired for helping a poor customer, only to be lifted higher the next day. Some saw it as a story about justice, others as a story about fate. But for Maria, it was simply her life. A life that had tested her, broken her, and then rebuilt her stronger than before. She no longer feared losing everything, because she had already lived through her darkest day and discovered that light could return even brighter. She knew struggles would still come. Life was never without them, but she also knew she could face them with courage. Her kindness had once seemed small, but now she understood it had the power to move mountains. Every evening, when the diner lights dimmed and she looked out at the empty tables, she whispered a quiet promise to herself: to never stop believing in kindness, no matter what it cost. Because in the end, it was kindness that had given her everything: her job, her respect, her future, and above all, her sense of purpose. Maria's story was no longer just about a waitress in a small diner. It was about the truth she carried, that even in the hardest times, when the world seems unfair and cruel, one act of compassion can change everything. And with that belief in her heart, she stepped forward each day, ready to face whatever came next, not with fear, but with hope.